section of poems based on origin tales in the beginning and Sky Woman. And it was interesting to me that you chose to put them in the same section with poems about the discovery of the Americas or the arrival of European people to this continent and the violence of colonialism. So you have this beginning, and then also this violence. Was that a conscious pairing? Were you thinking of the two of them together?
Yes, it was deliberate. What I was trying to do there was show that history did not begin when non-native people arrived, that there was already a series of stories that native people had developed about their place in the world and how they came to be there, that had worked for thousands of years. And then the European people show up and start writing things down and delineate all of that which came before as prehistory. And that's just ridiculous. You know, you can't draw a line and say, well, this is when things really started. And for whom? So I wanted to show those stories in the beginning as ways that native people talked about where they were in the world before Bartolome de las Casas and some of these other folks showed up. I'm interested in contributing to the other voices that are working in the English language to subvert or resist or expand or fight that erasure. You know, I feel like one of the biggest problems Native people have is that of invisibility, because there's such a small number that the stories are not even on people's radar, and the issues are not familiar to them. So there's this huge process of educating people that has to go on before you can even really get into anything of depth. We were talking earlier about when students take a Native American literature class, very often you have to submerge them in Native American studies so that they have a sense of the context and where they are historically and socially before you can even really start to teach the meaning of the literature.
And it must be a complex undertaking because, you know, teaching a class on Native American literature is like teaching a class on African literature. It's like many nations.
Right.
So how do you approach that complexity?
I try to ground every story in the notion that there's a particular group of people and a particular cultural and historical context that it draws on. I can't speak for every Native person. My stories are not the same, and the perception that there's only one Native religion or one Native story is completely wrong. That's part of what I'm trying to do in the book, is to give these little snapshots of different events that come from different cultures. So I said it's kind of like a bury my heart at Wounded Knee in poetry. And that book was really formative to me because I read it when I was about 12. And I was so furious. It was the first time I think I really had a sense of social conscience. And he took these different stories historically from different tribes and told how awful the experience was across the board, but individually. And that's what I'm trying to do here.
Another thing that you do in the book, and I'm thinking particularly the poem 1 and 3 or 4, you write in the collective. What are some of the responsibilities that come with writing in a collective voice like that?
Well, understanding that I can only speak for myself, but I'm also invoking a community of people. And in our community, in our tribal setting, there's a lot of we. It's not about distinguishing myself and setting myself apart from other people. It's about bringing everybody with me, the past generations and the present, and having the future generations in mind is a very common Native approach. And so I want to remember all of those people when I'm writing, you know, and at the same time kind of look to these historical moments as little vignettes in time that we can use to reimagine ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think you just mentioned this in passing, that somebody asked you once if you felt more like a Native American poet or more like a woman poet.
Yeah.
um, And it just made me wonder what kind of pressures you face as a Native American writer, what kind of expectations you feel like are placed upon you. What's life like
Uh-huh.
for a Native American writer?
Well, that goes into this whole notion of stereotypes that people have about Native cultures and Native people. And I thought that was the most bizarre question because the idea of pulling out a category and sticking yourself into a label that only represents part of who you are is very bizarre to me. It would be like saying, well, I have arms, but not legs. That's really strange. So I'm trying to um, think of myself in both communities when I'm writing to honor and represent the experience of women, some of which is tragic,
Mm-hmm.
and to be as forthright about that as I can because there are young people out there who are afraid to talk about what's happened to them. And I think it's our responsibility as people, maybe with a little bit more experience, to take that on and be really direct about it. Um, but also, as a Native person, there's this idea sometimes in the public's mind that you need to always write about Native topics. And I was saying earlier that Sherman Alexie has a poem about how to write the Great American Indian Novel or something, and he says you have to be wearing braids and sitting in your teepee, and at the end of it you have to say, "Go in peace, my son," and an eagle is there. And I reject that. We don't stay in that cultural capsule any anymore if we ever did. And I reject the notion that Native people or women are any less complicated than any other group of people.